Hey everybody, Tom here, and today in this video I want to teach you how to play the Riverfolk Company faction for the game Root. Now, this video will honestly just not make that much sense if you are not familiar with the general rules of Root. So if you don't know the general rules, you don't want to start with this video. I actually have a video in the description of this video that will teach you the general rules of Root if you want to learn. And so just keep that in mind as you continue forward. Now, this faction is basically all about trying to establish trades and working cooperatively with other factions for your ultimate victory. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and turn this over and look at the pieces here. The Riverfolk Company is going to have 15 warriors. That's these wooden pieces. They don't have any buildings in this game, but they do have 9 tokens. There's going to be 3 trading posts, one of each suit on the board. And they're also going to have these 3 service markers that you'll see in just a second. This is rated as a high complexity faction, and I would probably agree with that. Low aggression, because like I said, your job in this is to really try to aid other players, or at least to convince them to accept your aid. You're going to be dealing a lot with your cards, and your crafting ability is so-so. Crafting is a little bit unique in this one. Now, this faction is set up letter G, which means whenever the game is being set up, you're going to set up your factions in alphabetical order, and so any factions that are before the letter G need to come before you. And for this video, we're going to imagine that we are setting up a 3-player game with the Marquise de Cat and the Erie Dynasties already on the board, because that would be faction A and B. And now we're going to go ahead and set up faction G. The first part of setup is that we need to take 4 warriors. So let's take these 4. And you're going to place them in any of the clearings along the river. You could spread them out, you could cluster them together, however you want to do this. Now, this is not a strategy guide. This is just a blanket, how do you play this game guide. Let's see, for purposes of this video, let's go ahead and let's put 2 in this clearing. I don't know, I'm totally making this up. And we'll put 1 up in this clearing, and let's put 1 down here. That looks fun. Next up, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and flip our board over. We're going to put 3 warriors here in this payment box, like this. And then what we need to do is we're going to set up these tokens down here. These are going to be trading posts. They're going to be big scoring opportunities. And we're going to have these 3 beads here, 1 for each of these services. And you're going to set your price however you want to set your price at the beginning. This is not a strategy guide. Let's just learn how to play. So I'm going to go ahead and put the prices like this just for kicks and giggles. We'll go 1, 2, and 3. Now, the last part of setup is kind of shown right here. Our hand is actually not going to be a private hand, like almost every other faction just keeps their hand private. For you, you're going to keep your hand public and probably just along the top of the board like this. And at this point, we're all set up, ready to go. So let's talk about the Riverfolk Company. The Riverfolk Company is basically, you're going to try to get along with the other factions. You want to offer them stuff and collect their warriors in form of payment. So basically, you're going to offer a bunch of services, and other factions can pay you their warriors like money, and you're going to use that to fuel a lot of your actions. So there are going to be 2 main ways that you're going to score points as this faction. The first way is going to be by building these trading posts. Every time you put a trading post on the board, and let's talk about how to do that a little bit later, but when you get a trading post on the board, you would instantly score 2 points. Now, it's possible this trading post is going to be removed from a battle, and with this faction, if a trading post is removed, it actually goes back to the box. You do not get this thing again. So it's not like it's going to come back on your board and you rebuild it for 2 points. Once it's built, you collect your 2 points, and you're done. So that's going to be one of the ways to get points. So you can see 18 points available down here. But another way to get points is going to come right here in this part. So we're going to talk about that here in just a second. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about what happens on your turn. So during setup, you're going to set some prices, and we're going to talk more about those momentarily. But here in the Birdsong phase, there's 3 things that happen. The first thing that happens is you check your payment box. If it's empty, if there's nothing there, then you would just go ahead here. Let's put these down here. Then you would go ahead and add 2 warriors. Okay, so let's imagine that this is what's going on. Next, you're going to score dividends, which means that if you have a trade post on the map, and again, we're kind of pretending like we're a couple of rounds in and that we do have this trade post, because that doesn't start the game right there. But if you have a trade post on the map, then what you do is you're going to count how many warriors are in your funds. And so in this example, we've got 3. And for every 2 funds, you would score a point. So in this example, we've got 3 down here. We'd score 1 point for that 1 pair. And you're going to get warriors of all of the other factions in there. So keep that in mind. Next, after you've done that, you're going to move any warriors that are anywhere on your board into the funds box, and you're going to use these in order to fuel your future actions. So that's the general idea. Why don't I go ahead and just put these back? Let's pretend like we're on the first round again. So I'm going to bring this trading post back. And just to recap, your protectionism, if your payments box is empty, you're going to bring 2 warriors over there. Check your funds box at this point, and that's how you're going to like score points. So for every 2 warriors in that box, you're going to score a point. And then finally, any warriors that are around your board, you're just going to bring them all into the funds box after that. Now for the daylight phase, what's going to happen is you're going to spend your funds in order to fuel your main actions right here. So maybe we should just put these back here. Let's go ahead and just do that. Okay. Well, we should have done that anyway. We'd move all of our warriors down to that box. Cool. So here are the main actions that we're going to have available. They'll be very similar to the actions that your other players have in the game as well. First thing you can do is you can move. Now you're going to see the word commit and you're going to see the word spend, and they mean 2 different things. If you commit a warrior or you commit a fund, then you're going to move the warrior from here down into the commitments box. And that basically means your warrior is going to stay on your board. If it says spend, then you're going to actually hand the warrior back to the player that it owns to. So if I were to spend this guy later on, I'm actually going to take him off the board and put him over here. Or if it belonged to another player, I would hand it back to them. Okay, but for now it says move. We could go ahead and commit a fund in order to move. Now, this is called the Riverfolk Company, which means that they move along the river. So if you are going to be moving, let's say if I wanted to move from here to here, the general normal rules apply. You would have to either rule the clearing you're moving to or the clearing you're moving from. If you're not on the river, you've got to follow that rule. But a big special ability of the Riverfolk Company is that they're swimmers. You treat rivers like a path, and you can move along the rivers no matter who rules it. So if I'm going to try to move over here, I need to either rule this clearing or this clearing. But if I was here, then I could move along the river in whatever direction. You could follow the river no matter who rules those clearings. And as is the case for all movements, you would pick as many warriors from one clearing you want and move them to another clearing. All right, so that's movement, pretty straightforward. You could declare a battle. So you could commit a fund and say, hey, we're going to have a fight. Just a quick recap on fights in case you're new to the game. Let's say that I declare a battle over here. Then what we would do, assuming nobody played any ambush cards, is we would roll the 2 dice. Attackers would take the higher number, defenders get the lower number. You would adjust down so that your die isn't higher than your warrior count. So we're good here, don't need to adjust down there. And they would have to remove 2 items, and we would have to remove 0. So in this example, we would be able to get rid of this cat and win that battle and call it good. All right, so just a quick overview about battling. Now, let's talk about crafting. Crafting can feel a little tiny bit confusing, especially it was for me. But the idea of crafting, just a quick reminder, these cards up here that have icons up here and those same matching icons down here, these cards can be crafted, which could give you a special ability. Now, most factions are going to look at the board and see where they have certain tokens on the board. And that's not quite how this is going to work over here, especially because once you build a trade post, it could be lost forever from the board. So rather than really looking at the board for what you can craft, what we're going to do is we're going to use, we would commit a fund, okay, and you'd have to commit a certain number of funds. So let's say that I wanted to build this one here, or if I wanted to craft this card. What this means is that I would have to have 2 empty spaces on the bunny track, Okay, and then what I would do is I would actually move my funds over into these spaces like this in order to craft this card. So that's what it explains right here. You commit funds to the empty spaces on the trading posts over here, and then rather than gaining the listed effect of the card, so you could either gain the effect, in this example we could slide this card down here, have a new special ability, or what this says is that we could actually discard this card in order to bring another warrior onto the board into the payment spot to further fuel actions in the future. So that's what crafting is. Crafting is you would take one of your cards from up here, you'd have to move your warriors into these empty spaces, so you'd have to have empty spaces in order to do that, and then you'd be able to craft either by crafting like normal or discarding the card in order to bring more warriors over onto your board. All right, so that's the idea about crafting, and that comes from committing funds as well, but they don't come to commitments, they come over here. Okay, here, I guess let's try leaving those, see how that goes for the rest of the video. Next up, you could commit a fund in order to draw a card. Nothing fancy there, just remember that your cards will always be face up here, and you'll see why in just a little bit. You could also recruit. So you could spend a fund. All right, so we're out of funds, so let's reset a little bit. Okay, so you could actually spend a fund, so you would hand it back to the owner. For us, we would just put them back here, or if it was another player, hand it back to them. And that would let you place a warrior in any clearing with a river. So if I were to spend that fund, I could take, so it's basically I'm taking this guy and go ahead and pick any clearing along the river, and this guy would pop up. Finally, let's talk about establishing a trade post. So for that, why don't I go ahead and put these back on here. Let's see if we can get our first trade post out. What this says is that you would spend 2 funds. So again, you're going to return the warriors back to their owner, spend 2 funds of the, oh, I guess I couldn't do this. Well, it depends. So what you need to do, here we go. Before you do this, you need to know who rules the clearing where you are. Up here, the cats rule this clearing. We rule this clearing down here. So if I wanted to build a trade post down here, then I could spend my own warriors in order to take this action. But let's imagine that I wanted to go the other way. If I wanted to rule this clearing, then I would need some of their markers in my funds. So just for fun, let's go ahead and grab some. Okay, so let's imagine that I had these warriors down here. I could spend these warriors to do this action in the clearing where I'm going for this stuff, right? So I would hand these back to that player. Okay, I don't have that player here, but here we go. I'm handing it back to that player because they rule this clearing, and notice that it's a rabbit clearing. And what that would let me do is I would be able to build a rabbit trading post, and I would, and I would be able to put a warrior there. So I would bring this guy here and bring that token there, and now nobody rules this clearing because I've got 2 pieces, and so do they. But there's an important rule. Each clearing can only have a maximum of 1 trading post in it. So I couldn't put another bunny post over here. I'd have to go somewhere else. All right, so that's the general idea behind your actions, is that you're going to be spending the warriors here, either moving them to commitments, maybe moving them over into these spaces to craft, or handing the warriors back to their original owners in order to take these actions. But remember, the more actions you take on your turn, the more you're moving your pieces off of the funds, which means that you're not going to get points at the beginning of your next turn. And so there's this balance of trying to figure out how many actions do you take, but then you're going to get fewer points in the beginning, and so on. So let's just quickly talk about evening, and then we need to talk about services because that's going to be huge. So the evening is you would just discard. If you had more than 5 cards in your hand, you would need to discard down to 5. And then you would be able to set your service costs, and those service costs would be applicable until the end of your next turn. So let's say I just keep my service costs just like that. All right, now let's talk about service costs, because this is going to be really important for you to explain to the other players. You are selling 3 different kinds of services, and on a player's turn, at the beginning of their turn, during their Birdsong phase, they have the option to buy one of those services from you, plus 1 more service for each clearing where they have a token and you have a trading post. So for example, let's say it's the Marquise's turn. They would actually be able to take 2 services if they wanted to. One one in general, plus one because they have pieces here with a, and it could be any piece, but they have pieces here with a trading post. So let's say that the Marquis faction, it's the beginning of their turn, and we're going to remind them, hey, do you want to buy any of my services? So let's talk about the 3 services available. The way we've set our costs, here are our 3 services. Right now it costs 1 to take a card, 1 to use the riverboats, or sorry, 2 to use the riverboats, or 3 to have mercenaries. So let's talk about what that means. A hand card, it's kind of an interesting way to put it, but basically if the Marquis faction pays us 1 warrior, and we would collect their payment, here let me grab it, we would collect their payment right here in the payment spot. If they do that, then they can take any 1 card from up here. So they would just grab it, whatever. All right, so that would be 1 service, but they could do 2 services. They could do the same one, or they could pick a different one. So let's talk about it. Riverboats means if they were to pay me 2, I'm just grabbing these from the board, even though I shouldn't. If they paid me 2, right there, then for the rest of the Marquis's turn, the river is a path for them that they could move along. Normally they can't move along the river. They can if they pay you for the option to use that. So hand card, they just buy a card from your hand. Riverboats, during that 1 turn, they're allowed to use the rivers. And then mercenaries, this one's kind of crazy. Basically, if they pay you, so let's say the Marquis pays me 3, then what they could do is, during their daylight and evening phases, for purposes of being mercenaries, my pieces, my warriors, are theirs when it comes to ruling and battling. Not movement, ruling and battling. So if they paid me their 3, because that's the cost that I said, if they paid me 3 warriors, then all of a sudden these warriors belong to them, these belong to them, these belong to them when it comes to deciding who rules a clearing, and when you're battling, these guys are there too. Now, if they need to remove warriors during a battle, they need to remove an equal number of warriors between their faction and my faction as much as possible. And so yeah, you got to be careful. You can't just remove Riverfolk if you've got warriors there too. You got to be fair. So those are the 3 services that you're going to offer to the other players, and they're going to pay you in kind by giving you warriors up here. And again, you're going to be able to eventually score points for any funds here, move all of your warriors, and then spend these as much or as little as you want to, because obviously you want actions, but you also want points for your next turn. And that's basically how the Riverfolk work. There's 2 special abilities, are the ones that we talked about. You got to keep your hands public because people can buy them. That's not really a special ability, it's almost a limitation. And then you can move along the paths. You don't have to look for ruling or anything like that. You can just move along the rivers like they were paths. And that's how you play this faction. So I usually try to end these videos by saying, if you were to try to explain your whole faction to other players, especially new players, they're going to get lost. You want to filter the type of information that you give them. Usually, I recommend factions explain the basics of their faction during their first turn. But what you're going to want to do is before the game starts, before the first player, maybe it's the orange player, before they take their first turn, you're going to explain to all of the players that your role as a faction is to offer them services, and that during their Birdsong, they can pay you warriors from their piles in order to get these services. Now, most players are going to forget that, especially if they're new. They're going to forget that these are an option. So at the beginning of each player's turn, it's your job to try to sell them this stuff. You are the salesman. You're the tradesman. And so at the beginning of each player's turn, remind them during their Birdsong that they could either buy a card, that they could pay you to use the rivers, or that they could pay you to use your warriors as mercenaries. Always, always, always give them that option. Then, at the beginning of your turn, and you'll need to explain to them that they're going to pay in their warriors, and that you're going to use their warriors either for points or for actions. And then when it's your turn, to get just a little bit more detailed, you're going to explain to them, yep, I'm going to take your warriors down here, and I'm going to spend these things in order to take my actions. And you'll also, as you're going through, explain the point system. And basically, because your main focus is to try to get people to pay you for things, you would have already explained that. The only thing that you really need to explain to people is that you're going to get points by building these trade posts. You'll get 2 points per trade post there, and you'll get points for having all of these funds available from turn to turn. So, yep, a lot of your explanation is going to come at the very beginning of the game instead of during your turn. Anyway, I hope this video was pretty helpful for you just to explain kind of the inner workings of this faction. Obviously not a strategy guide, just a how-to guide. But yeah, this is a pretty fun faction in terms of you really do feel like a salesman trying to woo people in and setting your prices, because obviously a high price is going to get you a lot of warriors, but maybe fewer buyers. And so you want to kind of set that smartly and carefully. All right, thank you guys for watching. If you want to see any of the other factions, I've got all of the faction videos that I've made listed in the description of this video. That would be cool if you came and checked it out. But other than that, I guess I will talk to you later. Bye.